everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Tomcat Stitchery. I'm Whitney, and today I'm here with part 2 of my M8011 sew along. Today we are putting the body of the jacket together basically, and you'll be doing the lining the same way as the body of the outer jacket. As homework. But yes, before we go any further though, I just want to apologize. I feel like this whole sew along is not nearly as smooth and polished as the previous sew along, the Vogue 1643 sew along, mostly because I am pulling from a thrifted item and I am lining a pattern that was not meant to be lined. And this isn't just an easy throw a lining in it type pattern because there's cuffs. So there's cuffs on the sleeves with vents because there's cuffs, and then also like with the bands and stuff, it's making it a little trickier to sew, which is fine. I'm just doing a lot of things, you know, on the go. So I'm doing a lot of problem solving and that kind of thing. So I'm hoping that this makes sense. I did have a lot of people ask if I would show the process of turning the men's thrifted jacket into this M8011. So hopefully this does that for you. Let me know if you have any questions down below. And I did mess up with the lining. I had to write something across the bottom, changing one of the instructions I gave, so make sure you pay attention to that. But other than that, I'll see you next week, and we'll be finishing up this jacket next week. So I will see you then. Enjoy. Bye. Okay guys, it's time to sew. Before we sew though, I have a couple of disclaimers to make. Number one, I forgot to mention interfacing when we were cutting things out, only because almost all of the pieces that I need interfaced are already interfaced. I would use just a regular like weft interfacing, you know, the stuff that looks like this. I like the Palmer Pletch medium fuse. You can use fusible on leather, that's absolutely fine. You can do a higher heat, that will work just fine. I do it all the time. So yeah, you can go ahead, and the things that need to be interfaced, this front of this jacket doesn't need to be interfaced, it's just the interfacing was already there. But you need your sleeve cuffs interfaced, your front band interfaced, just 2 pieces of it, because there's 4 pieces of your front band. You need 2 of them interfaced, and you also need 1 of your collars interfaced, or collar bands interfaced, and then 1 of your bottom band if you're using that, which of course we are not. So that's one thing I wanted to mention that. So before we get started, I just want to say this whole sew along is going to be really by the cuff of my seat of my pants, not the cuff of my pants, by the seat of my pants. And this is typically when I'm doing projects like this, especially when using refashioned materials, it's totally by the seat of my pants. I am problem solving like on the go. I'm probably not even going to use the pattern instructions at all. I actually woke up, we had a snowstorm here and we had 2-hour delays earlier in the week. So my kids went to school 2 hours later than normal because they don't have to make those up. But anyway, I woke up early both of those mornings just thinking about how I wanted to finish the jacket. Because the cropped view of this jacket, it leaves the hem raw. So it's meant to be used with like a denim or something where you would just leave that hem raw and then it would get, you know, fringy, I guess, for you. But I want a hem on mine. And again, I didn't cut it, the cropped length. I cut it the length for the bottom band, but we obviously are not going to have the bottom band. So I think I can get away pretty easily with a 1-inch seam allowance, or 1-inch hem allowance. And it's actually going to be kind of not cropped, but it's going to be like a hip length jacket on me, you know, like right at like a high hip length jacket on me, which I think is perfect. That is a classic length for me, and I will get a ton of wear. Okay, so before we get started, if you recall, on the fronts of these jackets, I left the welt pockets, but the pocket bags, because this is a large men's coat, if you notice the pocket bags, it sticks out way past the front of the jacket, which we don't want. So before we do anything, I'm just gonna go back and I'm gonna start at the edge of the pocket. Let me move the other front there so you can kind of see the contrast here. I'm gonna start at the edge of this pocket bag, right where it is, but I'm gonna make it a ton smaller. Because I will have a 5/8 inch seam allowance, it's here. So I'm gonna mark that on the pocket bag, so I'm gonna know exactly, like I don't wanna go past this point when I am sewing that, and I'm just gonna kind of freeform it. So let's do that. So roughly 5/8 of an inch, I'm not even gonna mark anything, is about there. So I really don't want it to go past that line there. So this is gonna be, and I think we're okay. No, we gotta shorten it too. So about there. So I'm giving myself rough numbers here. Okay. And then I'll eventually make it around and come back to the original stitch line here. I'm got a Teflon foot on my machine for the leather, and I've got a leather needle in. I mean, this isn't leather, this is cotton here. But I'm just gonna sew it and make it work real quick. This is the Tim Gunn. Oh, I also have my stitch length set at 3, since we're gonna be working with leather. Okay, now I don't know if you're gonna be able to see. Okay, so there is my new stitching line there. There's the old stitching line. So I'm just gonna go, I mean, this was raw before, so I'm not even gonna worry about it. I'm just gonna go and trim, I don't know, leave about 1/2 of an inch on that, and then do the same to the other pocket bag. Okay, now that my pockets are nice and safely out of the way, you can no longer see them. And I mean, it made it smaller, but I mean, for the style of jacket, it's actually still pretty big for the style of jacket that it is. Most of the times on these jackets, you get teeny tiny seam allowances, or pockets, so I'm not gonna complain. Okay, now we are basically gonna sew the body of the jacket and the body of the lining. And then we are going to bag the hem. So we're gonna say, one set of bands onto the lining, one set of bands on the front. They're gonna kind of act like as a facing in the front of the jacket. And then, once we have basically 2 jackets, we're gonna bag the lining, and then we are just going to kind of stay stitch around the neckline, to keep them, and where they're gonna be used as one when we attach the collar, and also at the sleeve when we do the vents and attach the cuff at the bottom. That is the plan. Okay, so let's sew this jacket together. Again, this is a very easy pattern. If you are making a leather jacket, now again, you will have to line it if you're doing it in leather just because it gets sticky. But you could also underline all the pieces and just sew it as is if you put an underlining, which is just basically backing it with another fabric and sewing those 2 pieces as one, as opposed to a lining. They're similar, but not the same. So this is actually an excellent pattern to be using. So first things first, I'm going to sew my fronts to my back at the shoulder seam. We have 5/8 of an inch seam allowance in this pattern. So again, we're using leather, so we want to make sure that our, we've got the right side on the right side here because we don't want to unpick anything. So I'm going to sew at 5/8 of an inch. Again, I have a Teflon foot and a leather needle. I'm sewing with a stitch length of 3. So let's sew our shoulders. You could also use Wonder Clips or binder clips right here. I'm clearly not, but you could. Okay, sorry, my bobbin was getting all messed up and not wanting to work properly. All right, now typically you would go and you would press these open at an ironing board, but leather is not gonna press. I mean, you can kind of press it. You can kind of warm the leather and make it kind of do what you want. But I am just going to go and I am going to top stitch my seam allowances open. It gives a great detail to the front of the coat. I have top stitching in other parts of the coat, so that I left from the original coat. I also want to point out that all this interfacing you're seeing is not necessary for the pattern. This is just what was on the previous coat, and I'm just not gonna take it off. It's fused on there, so we're fine. So I'm just going to top stitch, again, about 1/4 of an inch away on each side of the seam line on both shoulder seams. And because I have a straight stitch machine, it's got a very small opening. My bobbin stitches look just like my top stitches, so I'm not gonna worry about top stitching on the front, but a regular home sewing machine, especially if you have the wider opening, you know, if you can go to a zigzag on the plate, you may want to flip this over and just kind of, I mean, as long as it's open, you can press on either side from the right side, because a bobbin thread does sometimes look a little different on that type of machine. All right, so as you can see on the right side, I just have 2 very nice top stitched lines on either side of my seam, and that keeps that nice and flat and effectively does the same. Oh, and my thread matches the thread on the previous coat really well too. That's always good. It just keeps it flat, and it's it does the same thing as pressing. It's just that leather will not hold a press. So we've got our shoulder seams sewn. So now you have kind of a vest. So now we're gonna sew our side seams, right sides together, and then we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to finger press those open and top stitch on either side. Right, and now we effectively have a vest. So there we go. And my side seams are top stitched on either side. I'm sorry I keep choosing dark materials to do these sew-alongs for. I know it's so much easier to see on lighter stuff, so I apologize. I'll pick something lighter for our next project. But there we go. Now, you're gonna notice there's a jog in these seams. These are the previous seams that were there. I'm not even gonna worry about that. I mean, that's just how I had to cut it out in order for it to work. I honestly didn't even think about that. Now my fronts do match up across the 2 seams that are there. Yeah, there's the seam up there and there's the seam down there. Those match up, and I'm more concerned about that. And actually there's a seam in my front band that I have that I got to match up. So that was just by a happy accident. I mean, I did it on purpose, but when I was lining things up, like that was where I needed to cut it out of, and it just happened to work, so that was good. All right, now we're gonna sew the sleeves and insert them, and then we're gonna do all of this again to the lining pieces, and we'll talk about lining more in a second. Let's do the sleeves, our leather sleeves, and then we'll do our lining. All right, I've got sleeve pieces here. Let me just get one. I don't want this to get confusing. This is my upper sleeve piece here, and there is a dot that I've actually clipped into down here, and it's on the long side. You know, you've got like this real scoopy side, and then you've got the long side. This is where the undersleeve attaches, and on the undersleeve there's also a dot, and I've marked it. Can you see there? I marked it in Sharpie, that dot that's right there. We're going to sew, that's the vent. And what my plan is I'm going to sew these. I'm not gonna mess with the vents right now. The pattern wants you to fold the vents over and then over again, which makes sense to do a clean finish, but that's gonna be really bulky, especially because I've got some seams from the previous coat in here. So what I'm gonna do is when I do the lining, the sleeve lining, I am actually gonna cut this vent, this excess off of the sleeve lining. We're just gonna kind of wing it and then just fold the leather on top of it so that, and then we're just gonna trim close to the stitching line, kind of like what I did in my daughter's coat. the soft shell coat that you guys, I don't know if you've seen that video yet or not, but anyway, if you haven't, you'll know what I'm talking about when I get there. But leather is fine raw, and kind of like I did with my reversible coat. So we may be leaving some edges of the leather raw because it just gets really thick when you're folding in on itself and then again folding in on itself, and it's fine to leave. I mean, a lot of ready-to-wear leather leaves their edges raw. So it's an acceptable seam finish. So that's the plan. So we're just going to, right now, we're gonna start sewing this at, let's see, I want my upper or my back, the back part of the sleeve, the smaller piece on top. So I'm gonna start sewing at the dot, which should all line up well, and it does. I'm gonna start sewing at the dot and then sew all the way up, and again, you can use Wonder Clips or whatever. I'm not, I like to live life on the edge. And remember, the vent on the undersleeve, the smaller sleeve, will go over your cut edge, and that's okay. So again, I didn't use pens. I mean, I just pulled the excess in there as I went. I have a very thick area here because it was part of the seam. But I'm well, I don't know. I may cut some of that out because now that it's sewn, it's just part of the seam allowance. I think I may cut some of that out. I can't cut it all out because I need the vent here at the bottom. But I may clip in. So I'm trying to remember. Sorry, see, I told you you're going to be watching me do this on the fly. Okay. So we have to clip the back sleeve anyway above the extension, so we have to clip it to the seam lines here. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and do that, because that's in the instructions. I'm gonna go ahead and clip above the extension, and I'm just going to trim off this part here. So I'm gonna have a very weird looking seam allowance, but again, it's fine. I just want that bulk out of there. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to top stitch that open, 1/4 of an inch on either side. And I'm going to stop, I'm gonna stop right where I have clipped, right above the extension on the back sleeve. I'm gonna stop right there on both sides. Okay, and now those are all ready for us to, I mean, the instructions want us to fuss with it now, but I'm not going to because I want to get the lining in. So again, it's not the easiest way that I'll be doing this because it's much easier to work with your vent now, but yeah, we're not. So actually, the way this is cut is gonna, I think, work about perfectly to layer over. So that's exciting. But yeah, we're not gonna mess with that now because I wanna get the lining in. So now we're gonna put the other two sides together, sew it at 5/8 of an inch, and then we're going to attempt to sew that open as well. Okay, now this is where it gets tricky because we're gonna be sewing into a tube. So I'm gonna turn my sleeve right side out, again, just because I wanna sew from the wrong side. We're gonna actually sew into the sleeve. So now I've got my sleeve like so, and I'm just going to finger press. We're just gonna go slow so that we can press, top stitch this open. There we go. We've got one sleeve completed. We have our seam allowances stitched down. And then we've got our weird vent area. So I'm going to do the other sleeve just like it, and then we're gonna set it into the jacket. Okay, I have both sleeves here, and we are going to insert these into the body of the jacket. So it's just like inserting sleeves into any jacket. I mean, I'm gonna turn, we basically have a jacket here. We've got sleeves. You wanna make sure, so my body of my jacket is inside out. My sleeves are right side out, and I'm just gonna match my notches. So, and definitely take your time on this so that you don't want this to be wrong. Oh, wait, that is right. Nope, that's not right. It goes in. Is that right? Yes. Okay. Now, I'm going to pin my leather. I'm just going to pin, you guys have seen me put sleeves in before. I'm gonna pin inside the seam allowance, and it's not gonna be easy, and I'm probably gonna have to throw these pins away once I'm finished. But I'm keeping my pins in my seam allowance. I just find they are more secure. I mean, you could do the binder clips or the Wonder clips. I mean, you totally are gonna ruin the pins that you're using. Really gotta stab them through there. Okay, and now I'm gonna do like the Janet Prey way. I'm gonna flip the sleeve around like so that it's like folded over the jacket kind of, so that I can then, basically I'm sewing with the sleeve against the feed dogs, but I'm not going around a free arm because that can distort and stretch your sleeve and sleeve hole out. So you're gonna wanna be careful though, because there's a lot of pins and they're gonna be on the underside. It probably would have been wiser for me to pin on the other side, but again, going by the seat of my pants. So now I'm gonna sew in the sleeve. Alrighty, there's the sleeve, it's all set in. Again, I find that when you do that, especially leather, it molds. So it's easy to ease in because it kind of stretches and moves with you. Oh my gosh, look at that underarm, look at that join. Look at that join. Does that make anyone else like unreasonably happy? Okay. So there's one set in sleeve. So now I'm gonna go set in the other sleeve, and then I will do that off camera real quick, and then I'll come back and we're gonna put the bands on. Okay, this is turning out really well so far. I just did a quick little try on. It's very sticky at the moment because it doesn't have lining in it, but I'm so excited about this jacket, guys. Okay, so now we're going to attach our bands. Now you cut out 4 bands. This band actually has, like I said, this seam that was already on the previous jacket, and I've got it to where it's gonna line up with one of the seams on the front. So that was a happy accident. Again, you're going to want to interface 2 of these. There's interfacing a little bit on one of them just because there was the previous coat, but my other 2 that I'm going to attach to the lining actually have interfacing on the totally on the back of both. So I'm going to use those as my interface pieces. So you've got a notch on this, and that gets matched up to the notch on the front of the jacket. So again, we're completely going off the pattern. This is not the way that the pattern is drafted at all. Okay, so basically we're just going to start right sides together. We're going to sew this band all the way to the front of the jacket. And then we're going to be done with the front for now. So I'm going to sew these 2 to the front of the jacket real quick. I am trying to decide what I want to do here. I think I will go ahead and top stitch one side. No, I'm going to go ahead and top stitch the seam allowance open, I think. And then I will add another line of top stitching to the outside when this gets attached to the other bands. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna sew these right sides together on both sides of the coat, and then they're gonna get seam allowance finger pressed open, and I'm gonna top stitch down on either side of the seam allowance. I also want to point out, if you do have a pocket like I do, make sure that pocket backs out of the way. You don't want to accidentally sew into that. Okay, my bands are now sewn on. I had a little bit of an accident. You're gonna notice me doing some unpicking because a little bit of the jacket got pulled under, and so I sewed, yeah, there's some stitching line visible there. The worst of it's at the bottom, which is fine because that'll get folded up with the hem, but there's still some threads there. So hopefully that'll just wear out eventually, but again, it's not the end of the world. Leather's supposed to look a little worn, and yeah, so I did. I had to unpick a little bit because my jacket got folded up. Those are the things you want to watch for. Okay, I'm going to show it to you on the mannequin real quick, and then we're going to stop for today. I want you to go ahead, I've got homework for you, do exactly this to your lining. So the shoulders together, the side seams together, insert your sleeves, stopping at that point where the vent is, and then attach the other set of bands to the front of the lining. I'm gonna do that off camera because it's pretty simple, and I'm trying to not make this sew along quite as long as the last one I did. So I'm gonna show this to you on the mannequin real quick, and then we'll finish up for today. Okay, so again, this really is an easy project. The only hard thing about this is that we are using leather, and thrifted leather at that. So you'll notice like my welt pockets come up pretty high, and they're kind of far on the side, but again, I just wanted to use what was at the original jacket, and they're big because it was a big men's jacket. My pocket is all wonky under there. But I've got the sleeves set in, I've got just the gap, where is it? The gap here, where it just isn't sewn at the bottom yet. We'll do that once we attach the lining. My bands are on and top stitched. Yeah, so again, for next week, I want you to go ahead and sew your lining just the same way. We're gonna leave that vent on the sleeve open and sew the other set of bands to the front of it. Now, so I'm going to have some questions. People are going to ask me, you know, the lining is the same length as the outside of the coat. Yes, it is right now, and we will trim that. I was waiting to decide what I wanted to do about hem length, which is why I kept those lining pieces as long as the fashion fabric, the leather, because I wanted to be able to make that decision later. So go ahead and sew your lining all the way together. We are going to trim off the hem, but wait and do that next week, and I'm going to talk to you about what we're going to do and why. All right, see you guys next week.